Hi, everybody. Welcome to final part 5 of this series called Mahalia Jackson, the Voice of Gospel and Civil Rights. We begin our final part 5 of this video, and this is my story. We are done page 96. Now, beginning with on page 97. Number 9, Love and Loss. In 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that buses and other forms of interest in transformation could not be segregated, but in practice, there was still a whites-only policy in some areas. In May 1961, a group of activists who called themselves Freedom Riders designed to challenge segregations on interest in buses. The Freedom Riders, made up of both blacks and whites, bought tickets for business traveling through states in the South. At bus terminals, blacks sat down for service at whites-only lunch counters, and they used restrooms designed for white people. In some cities, there were no problems, but in others, the Freedom Riders encouraging violence. In Innocence, Alabama, whites chasing after the bus and flinging a bomb through a window, setting the bus on fire. As the Freedom Riders holding off the buses to escape the flames, some of them were grabbed and beaten by the mob. Angry whites also attacked Freedom Riders in Montgomery, Alabama, setting one African American man on fire. Police used tear gas to bring down whites to the end. Jackson was not directly involved in these protests, but she did what she could in the fight for equal rights. She seemed to raise money for the civil rights movement, participating in a large fundraiser for the Sutton Christian Leadership Conference in Los Angeles during the summer of 1961. She also continued to tour. I had hopes that my singing will break down some of the hate and fear that divided the white and black people in the country, she said. Jackson was reaching new milestones while with her music. In 1962, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Scientists adding a new category to new Academy Awards, Gospel. Jackson was the first to receive that award. On October 13, 1962, she became the first gospel artist to perform at New York's Phenomenal Hall in 1963. Jackson won another Grammy Award for her album Great Songs of Love and Faith. In the spring of 1963, Jackson organized an SCLC benefit in Chicago. She pursued musicians, entertainers, stagehands, and ushers to volunteer their service. Every penny was to be donated to SCLC. Model Richard Daly agreed to let her lease to Ella Crown Theater in the McCormick Place Convention Center, free of charge. Although African Americans were later criticized Daly for not being a strong supporter of civil rights, he was a good friend to Jackson. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to the crowd of more than 5,000 cheering people, and Jackson sang. Soon plans were under the way for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom to be held in Washington, D.C. In August 1963. President John F. Kennedy had sent his proposed civil rights bill to Congress in June. Organizers of the march wanted people to come to Washington to show their support for even stronger civil rights legislation. King asked Jackson to participate in what will be a most memorable day, with host singing followed by his I Had a Dream speech. Some people have predicted that the day will be mirrored by a racial riot. All the officers of the Washington, D.C. police force were on duty that day. There were international policemen brought in from other communities to help, but as the marchers gathered at the Washington Monument, it looked, it looked more like a scene from the country film. People were picking in, talking and singing about people were picnicking and talking and singing. About 200,000 people marched to the Lincoln Memorial, but there was no violence. It was as if the human race had taken a day off from being mean to each other, Jackson noted. And then that Indian trumpet was soon followed by tragedy. Less than 3 weeks later, whites born in an African American church in Birmingham, Alabama. 4 African American girls were killed. 2 months later, on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed as he rode in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. Jackson was in Los Angeles rehearsing for a television special for CBS when she heard the news of Kennedy's assassination. The rehearsal was canceled, and she went back to her hotel room. She cried as she watches the news coverage. In the meantime, CBS was hurriedly putting together a special program about Kennedy, and Jackson was asked to participate. Only hours after Kennedy's death, she sang Nearly My God to Thee on national television. While tears rolling down her cheeks, Jackson had never wavered in her admiration for Kennedy and in her behalf that he was an ally for civil rights. With his death, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president. He vowed to continue to work for the civil rights legislation that Kennedy had proposed to Congress earlier that year. Jackson later said that one of the people who helped her through the sadness she felt after Kennedy's death was Cinema Galloway. Jackson had met Galloway about a year earlier when she was in California recording an album. Galloway was immediately taken with Jackson when he heard her sing. I thought to myself, a woman who can sing like that must be very warm inside, he said. Galloway was originally from Indiana and had sold real estate in the Chicago area until 1951. Then he moved to California with hopes of jumping starting a music career. He played flute, clarinet, and saxophone and had studied music in Chicago before going into real estate. Jackson had known the Galloway's family in Indiana when he was married. When Jackson saw him in California, he was a widow with a long daughter. Galloway and Jackson began spending time together, wherever she was in Los Angeles, which was often. Columbia Records had moved its recording studios from New York to California and been on television shows. Jackson appeared on Ralph Freemandale. She had bought a 16-unit apartment building in the winter as an investment and also as a place to stay when she was in Los Angeles. Her younger half-brother managed the building for her. Galloway also visited Jackson in Chicago. Jackson had a full life with her career friends, and since her divorce from Hockey Mahal, she had never remarried. She often joked about that with her and Dinas, showing out all those handsome men. She was sad, I can find me a good husband. Although she joked about it, she was lonely. I had nobody to come home to. She said, at my age, I person miss these things more and more. In 1964, Jackson left for a month-long European tour. On the way home, she thought about her future and about Galloway. He was talking about marriage, and Jackson decided she was ready for that step. They were married on July 2nd, 1964, in a small private ceremony. The only people present were Jackson's secretary, who served as a maternal honor, and her manager, the best man. Galloway was 47 years old, and Jackson was 51. On that same day, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that made segregation legal in restaurants, hotels, and other public places. It was protecting the people from discrimination by police, and it stated that voting requirements for blacks must be the same as those for whites. And those in some areas, discriminatory voting requirements for African Americans has prevented them from voting. Later that year, Amberlin magazine published a story about Galloway and Jackson and their July wedding. It printed a causing picture of the couple at home. Photos showed them in the kitchen doing dishes together, and Jackson working in her garden. There were also photos of Jackson with Galloway's 5-year-old daughter, Cinema. It appeared that Jackson finally had the family she had always wanted. Still, not everyone was happy to see Jackson married. Soon after the announcement of their wedding, Jackson began receiving letters from people who felt the whole marriage would interfere with her. It would interfere with her work. Jackson's friends, who had been recreative visitors in her home, felt that Galloway did not want them around, so they began to stay away. Although Jackson tried to resume, it was soon reassured her friends and fans. She also had concerns about her marriage. Jackson soon realized that some of the things that had first attracted her to Galloway because problems after they were married. That's the very thing that I love in him. His gallowing, his zest for living, became an accessory with him after we were married. Jackson recalled he wanted to go to he wanted to go some places every night, but I wasn't used to that. My body had to have rest. 2 months after their wedding, Jackson was hospitalized after having a heart attack. She would be admitted to the hospital several times over the next 2 years. She was diagnosed with diabetes and heart problems. In addition to her physical ailments, Jackson was also sick at heart. She knew that her marriage was not a good one, but she kept her feelings to herself. Galloway was unhappy, and I was sick. Jackson later said, I had made a mistake, but I did not want people to know that I had made such a fool of myself. Another problem in their marriage was Jackson's career. She understood that some men find it hard to be married to the successful woman. She allowed Galloway to take an active role in her career, including doing engagements for some of her songs. She also tried to help Galloway with his music career. She introduced him to her contacts in the business, and even convinced Claudia to record him. When he didn't, when his career did not take off as he hoped, he became angry and critical of Jackson. Jackson was escaping her hurt that he criticized in her grandmother when she did an interview with the press. She had once been embarrassed about her lack of formal education, but she no longer felt that people judging her because of it. I am not an educated woman, she said. I'm just myself, and the world has escaped me as I am. Jackson continued working and acting as if everything was fine with her marriage. On October 7, 1965, she sang for President Lyndon B. Johnson at a concert in Washington, D.C. At the White House. Jackson, Galloway, and Milner Falls posing for photos with the President and First Lady, but it will be one of Jackson's last performances with Falls as her counterparts. It is not clear exactly what happened between Jackson and Falls. One explanation came from boy brother John Sellers, who Jackson had taken in as a boy. She had helped him launch his career in music, and she and Sellers have remained friends over the years. Sellers, who criticized the way Jackson held on to her money, saying she was too selfish. Mahalia was the type of woman who wouldn't pay anybody if she could. Keep from doing it. Sellers know it. That's how she got rich and kept her money. Sellers said Jackson fired Falls after her daughter contributed asking for a raise. Others believe that Galloway had come between Jackson and Falls. They said that he wanted to control Jackson's career and want Falls out of the way. Still others say that Falls was forced to retire for health reasons. She had arthritis and arthritis, and touring had become too hard for her. Jackson continued touring and supporting in several ways. In 1966, Chicago, like many other cities across the United States, who plundered with race riots in spite of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, racism still exists. African Americans who tried to move from ghettos into white neighborhoods, facing the same kind of prejudice that Jackson had met with when she brought her home in 1957. That was a problem that Martin Luther King Jr. addressed in Chicago during the summer of 1966. Jackson helped organizing a large freedom rally in Chicago held on July the 10th, with temporaries soaring into the 90s. About 60,000 people gathering at Soldier Field. Jackson sang and King spoke. After the rally, 5,000 people, including Jackson, marched into City Hall. King taping the carpet on their demands for opening houses on the door of the building. There were other protests throughout the summer as blacks marching into white neighborhoods. One example recalled a march on August the 5th, with Jackson helped leader march through rocks, bricks, and bottles at the marching, hitting King in the face with a brick. But King marching on, and so did Jackson. She knew from her own experiences how hurtful it was to be belted from a neighborhood because of race. That year, Jackson and Galloway separated. It was the first step in a messy divorce. Jackson owned the house, but she had moved out to avoid some of the unpleasantness of their marriage. With a divorce pending, she felt that Galloway should be the one to leave. Galloway refused, and Jackson spent 3 months living in hotels. She eventually got her home back, and the friends who had stayed away during her marriage began to return. The divorce was filed in April 1967. That month, she sang at an Easter concert in New York's Philharmonic Hall. People said that she was not herself at that concert. She looked frail and sang in a surprisingly quiet voice. with the streets a whole divorce. Jackson had lost weight and was down to about 160 pounds. It was a happy weight for her heart, but she was more comfortable at about 200 pounds, which she considered her singing weight. By summer, Jackson had gained back some of the lost weight and some of her old energy. At a concert in Oakland, California, she told the audience that there were whole family. I've been serving you for 30 years, she said. I'm married to you, not to that man. Then she sang a wisely version of How I Get Older. How I Get Over. How I Got Over. That year, Jackson left for another European tour. That tour was to include concerts in West Germany, Britain, Switzerland, and India. Unfortunately, she got no farther than West Germany. She collapsed backstage in Berlin and was hospitalized for what was said to be exaggerated. She canceled the rest of the tour and returned to Chicago to rest. On April 4th, 1968, Jackson's world was again shattered when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Jackson sang Precious Lord, Take My Hand at his funeral service in Atlanta, Georgia. I think she sang more beautiful than I had ever heard her sing before. Dr. King's window, Carlton Scott King noted. 2 months later, on June 5th, Senator Robert F. Kennedy was shot while he was in Los Angeles campaigning for the Democrat nomination for the presidency. He died the next day. Once again, Jackson put aside her own sadness long enough to appear on CBS television to sing in his honor. After King's death, Jackson was not as entering in the civil rights movement. She focused on cabaret work, such as raising money for churches. She continued to make plans to build her temple in Chicago, but there were too many roadblocks in finding a location and gathering funding. In the end, she was not able to achieve that dream, but she did provide scholarships for college students through the Mahalia Jackson Foundation. She also continued to tour in the United States and overseas. Chapter 10. A star that continues to shine. In the spring of 1971, Jackson traveled to Japan as an unofficial goodwill ambassador for the U.S. government in Tokyo. She sang at the Imperial Palace for Imperial Laboratory in honor of his 70th birthday. From there, she went to 70th birthday. From there, she went to India, where she gave a 3-hour concert. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was late for the meeting because she did not want to leave the concert early. At the U.S. government's request, Jackson returned to Europe in September 1971 to entertain American troops in Germany. There were problems between black and white American soldiers situated there. Government officials hoped that Jackson would be able to calm some of the tensions with her music. Unfortunately, she fell ill almost immediately and was hospitalized. She had to be flown back to Chicago on an Army medical evacuation plane. During the next few months, Jackson was in and out of the hospital several times. On January 27, 1972, she died of a heart failure in Evergreen Park, Illinois, a few days after abandoning surgery. She was 59. At the greatest Seminole Baptist Church in Chicago, more than 40,000 people filled past Jackson's coffin to pay their respects. Because such a large crowd was expecting for the funeral service. It was held at the Old Crown Theater. It had seating for about 5,000. At the service, Thomas A. Dawson read a poem that he had written, and Colonel Scott King, Colonel Scott King, spoke about how much her husband had enjoyed Jackson's music. He had said that a voice like this comes not once a cemetery, not once a century, but once a millennium. Jackson's friend Robert Anderson saying, "We warmed up a little higher." He was a consequence. My mother falls, who arthritis was so bad that by the time that she had to be helped to Pinell. The receiving CL Franklin preaches at the service, and his daughter, a Whitney Franklin, saying, "Precious Lord, take my hand." Jackson's body was flown to New Orleans, right? Again, laying in the state as an assessment of 60,000 molars. 5 passed. After another large funeral service, Jackson was buried at Providence Memorial Park in a suburb of New Orleans. Shortly after her death, Jackson was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award on May 6, 1997. She was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and on July 15, 1998, she was honored with a stamp issued by the U.S. Postal Service. It was a part of the coalition of stamp honoring women in gospel music. As a child in New Orleans, Jackson was surrounded by music, blues, jazz, the hymns of Hope Baptist Church, and the rhythms of the Pentecostal Church. All of those influences became part of her ukulele style gospel music. She sang gospel when people said it would not sell, and she made it popular. Jackson sang for 4 American presidents and for royalty throughout the war. But she was happiness when she was singing it for people in small churches. She sang to people of all denominations and all faiths during the civil rights movement. Both blacks and whites embracing her music, forgetting their differences, at least for a while. When she first singing, there was no hearted. World over noted. Today people still enjoy her songs, which have been registered on compact discs. More than 30 years after her death, Jackson's music continues to touch their hearts and lift the spirits of listen throughout the world. That's the end of this book, A Found Video, the Part 5, and that book called Mahalia Jackson, The Voice of Gospel and Civil Rights. I hope y'all enjoying this book. It's very touchable and it's very possible on Mahalia Jackson. And this is her story. Till then, God bless you. And God bless you all. God bless you, everybody. Peace and love.